Hi everyone, welcome, welcome. So I just want to introduce our MC for the evening, Julio Mejia. So he first rose to prominence in 2023 when he became one of the first Gen Z elected officials to the Greater Lawrence Technical School Committee. Since then, he has worked with a variety of organizations, becoming the executive director of the Merrimack Valley Project at only 21 years of age. He was also a member of Governor Maura Healey's Youth Advisory Council and traveled to Washington, D.C. to represent Dominican Americans during the Biden administration. Thank you so much, Julio. Welcome.
Well, thank you for coming, most importantly, and thank you, Marissa, for the invitation. I didn't have it fully scripted, but I'm going to read off my phone and then introduce Professor Forrant. So, Julio Mejia, Executive Director of Merrimack Valley Project. We are a community organizing network that works to advance social and racial justice by organizing faith, labor, and community organizations across the region, ensuring that we are doing that in the lens of civic engagement and engaging with leaders in communities like Lowell, Lawrence, Haverhill, and across the state as well, as we are affiliated statewide and nationally with Massachusetts Communities Action Network and nationally Faith in Action. And so a lot of the work that we do, around housing, immigration, public education, the many issues that impact our neighbors, our communities, are at stake in this moment. And today we're going to hear from Professor Forrant around immigration, particularly, and as we hit the country's 250th anniversary. So I'll just read it off and then I'll introduce Professor Forrant. So as we approach the 4th of July this weekend, the beginning of America's 250th year, we're invited to ask a deeper question than how old the nation is. We must ask how close we are to becoming the democracy we are long claimed to be. This anniversary should be an invitation to imagine and to imagine a future, a democracy that works for our people. This week reminded us, and this week will remind us, that American democracy remains unfinished. The Supreme Court reaffirmed that birthright citizenship belongs to every child born on this soil, preserving a constitutional promise rooted in the 14th Amendment. And at the same time, the administration moved to end TPS for Haitians and Syrians, sending families back toward instability and danger. A lot of our own neighbors. And even as many have built lives in their churches and their businesses and in their communities, together these moments reveal a tension that has always shaped this nation, and that's that the promise of belonging, expanding, and narrowing in the same breath. And as people in community, people of faith, organizers, leaders in our communities, we refuse to confuse the legal victories with the liberation of people. The laws matter, court rulings matter, but justice is measured by whether people can live with dignity, safety, and belonging in our communities. Our task is to not only celebrate an unrealized democracy, but to help realize it. And we are called to imagine and organize for a country big enough and moral enough for all of us, where citizenship is more than legal status and where freedom is more than a slogan, but most importantly, where every person can thrive in our communities. Frederick Douglass asked, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?" This year, perhaps each of us should personalize the question, what is the 4th of July to today's Black American, to the Latino immigrant, to the Haitian, the Jewish, Palestinian, to the Muslim neighbors, to atheists, to the indigenous communities, all of us around us, together in community. And let us not be disillusioned by that which has oppressed us, but be reminded by whatever democracy is, we are those who contributed to and imagined it. The answer is not meant to produce despair, but most importantly meant to awaken the imagination and responsibility that I mentioned earlier. The work before us is ensuring that we're building that America that has always been possible but has not fully arrived. And so that is the work of our people, of our communities. That is the work of the next 250 years. So please, let's continue working together, committed to being the architects of new communities in the new America. So, Professor Forrant, who's a professor at UMass Lowell, right down the street. And so I'll just read a little bit of his background. He's a professor of the history department at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. Teaches courses around history, global labor issues, and international development, immigration, most importantly. He's the director of the department's graduate program, and he's been a consultant to the UN Industrial Development Organization, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the International Metalworkers Federation, and several trade unions around us. His research activities have been funded by, and among others, the International Metalworkers Federation, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, the Russell Sage Foundation, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and others. He's the editor of 3 volumes on sustainable regional development, the author of many published articles, and reports on a forthcoming book on industrial development and decline in the Kentucky River Valley and New England. Before completing his graduate education, he worked as a machinist and union business agent at the now closed American Bosch plant in Springfield, Massachusetts, and ran a community-based economic development program. He received his degree in multiple ways. He got his bachelor's at Northeastern University, his master's at Northeastern in history, and a doctorate at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And yeah, give a warm welcome to.
A warm welcome we get, no matter what. Thanks all for being here on such a unpleasant night, although actually it's not that bad in here when you just kind of relax and get used to it. It's sort of like full-time meeting hall or something. You just kind of deal with it. So I'm going to try to do, and basically I'm not going to be able to, but I'm going to try to do the impossible, which is cover 200 years of Lowell history in about 50 minutes. And then leave enough time for a conversation. And so why I wanted to do this and why I'm really happy that that people are here is I've been thinking a lot about Lowell's 200th birthday. And that at the outset, Lowell basically was built by immigrant workers. Most of the canals that were dug, most of the first mill buildings, were put in place by Irish immigrant laborers as early as the mid-1820s and going forward in a really big way by the 1840s after the Irish famine. And I was wishing that the city, in its celebration of the 200 years, would actually do something with a public face about immigration and about immigration history and how the world came to Lowell, which is the way I think about this history. And when it was obvious they weren't, I said, well, then I'm going to do it. And the other thing is we have, from the national park, we have this really outstanding new, relatively new, exhibit on the immigration history of Lowell that just sits right down the road from here, next to Boarding House Park, that was basically designed and developed by the community, by roundtables full of people representing the city who met even through COVID to actually brainstorm what should be in the exhibit, what should it look like, what artifacts ought to be in there, and then the old museum was completely gutted and a new one was put in there. But the city doesn't really, and the park right now, for obvious reasons, don't really say, come on the 250th and celebrate, this aspect of our history. And again, we have probably one of the best, and all kidding aside, I helped work on it, so people could say, well, you're just bragging. And in a way, I am, and there are many people in this room that worked on it too. It's one of the best museums anywhere in the country talking about the immigration history of a place, by far. And the fact that that's not championed in a public way makes me crazy. One more thing, and then I'll get off my crazy horse, and actually what we came here to do. This semester I taught immigration history at the university. And every semester when I teach it, I try to come up with a project for the students to work on. I don't want them to just sit and listen to me. That's not learning about being a historian or a community engaged human being. And so I want them to do something if I can find it. And I basically, walking across City Hall so many times, you can't help but see all the immigration memorials and monuments that are there. But you don't necessarily know why they got there, how they got there, who put them there, who funded them, who decided what the words would be on the granite, who decided what the design would be, who picked the designer, who picked the architect, who picked the spot, where the damn thing is. There's nothing that you can see when you walk through there that says that. So I said, okay, class, we're going to do this. We're going to become the detectives of the immigration monuments in front of Lowell City Hall. We're going to do the research. We're going to track down the people that are still around, that have the oral history of why those got there, who did it, how the money was raised. And we're going to write, you are going to write, not me, you're going to do this. Sadly, it's on you. You're going to work in teams of 3, and you're going to write 6 or 7 page histories of every one of those markers. We didn't have enough students to do them all, but we did 10 of them. And so now I am working on putting them together in a booklet that will hopefully, at some point, I'm hoping the city will, in its infinite wisdom, decide that there ought to be something there somewhere where people can, with a QR code, link to this document somewhere online and read about, because the history is incredible. What I learned about Lowell from this project, I thought I knew a lot of stuff. And when they started digging in as to who every single one of them, and if you have time, I know it's really hot out, but if you have time tonight or some other time shortly, well, this is fresh in your mind, go look at them. Every one of them was instigated by people in the community, from the immigrant group that marker represents. And so if that's not like a fantastic thing that the city should be bragging on, right? I mean, there are a lot of times we'll be fighting about stuff like now the data center and all that, but then we miss this opportunity where, damn. And I had the students find out, look as much as they could, is there anything else like this anywhere in America? Is there any other place in front of a civic building that in a representative way has all of these immigrant markers, monuments, and memorials? We couldn't find one.
Wow.
Now, I don't know if that's true because obviously we didn't do a microscopic, but if there aren't many, we might be one of 10, maybe one of 20. And again, why aren't we bragging on that? And telling that story about what that means. So anyway, that's my excitement and whatever. And my summer homework is making that little booklet. And then I'm hoping if I have to go to, I'm hoping there are some city councilors here tonight. I'm hoping that a resolution will be soon put before the council, and I will go and yell and scream and wave my arms around like a crazy person about why they should do this, and we'll slowly get the QR code up there somewhere. That's an ambition I have before I expire, although I don't plan on doing that anytime soon. What I think, again, the monuments, the markers, everything, these images tell us is this incredible sort of historical interconnection between various immigrant communities and groups. I mean, you see a market and Comiskey alleyway, right, to the Irish, and you see a Greek church and St. Patrick's Catholic Church staring at each other across the canal. I mean, that's Lowell, that interesting intersection, but we also have to deal with this. So Lowell basically, in fits and starts, likes immigrants, doesn't like immigrants, likes people, doesn't like people. We'll talk about that. It's the yin and yang of American history. That's just the way it is. This quote by George Washington I found the other day. I had always hoped that this land might become a safe and agreeable asylum to the virtuous and persecuted part of mankind, to whatever nation they might belong. Him having in his brain at the founding of the country an idea that the new country would be a refuge. The new country would be a place where people could feel safe. And I juxtaposed that with this, which was in the New York Times just the other day, from a Peruvian immigrant naturalized citizen who now writes these really thoughtful essays every week in the New York Times. And he says, America does not always welcome newcomers. Our nation of immigrants tradition coexists with a tradition of suspicion, rejection, even violence. No matter how much America may need us, it often does not want us. Those of us who arrive from somewhere else, whether as children or adults, who speak or look or pray or eat in our own way, live that tension every day. And that's the reality in this 250th birthday year. There are far, far too many of us living in a tension. I have students who will come to me before final exams and came to me this past semester. They didn't know if they could take their final exam because they were afraid to leave home. They live in Lawrence, they live in Haverhill, they live in communities north of Boston but commute to the university. Just the idea of leaving. And they'll say to me, when my grandmother goes to the grocery store, I don't know if I'll see her again. Now, I never, ever in my entire life had that thought in my head. And so for anybody to have to walk around carrying that in their brain, there's something wrong, right? There's something wrong. And so I think these two things are another good juxtaposition of the history. The other thing is, so I'm going to do a little bit of current events and then go backwards and come forwards again. 2025 was the first time since the Great Depression that more people left the country than came in. I think we kind of know why, but it's interesting to see it as a data point, right, in a conversation. And these are people leaving by choice, right? When I say this, right? So that's pretty extraordinary. That's an interesting state of affairs. Canada even made it possible that if you have Canadian roots, you can become a Canadian citizen. I actually was interviewed on the Canadian version, I don't know what it's called, but the Canadian version of the BBC. They found, what is it called? CBC. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. They called me and said that they had seen I had written a lot about French-Canadian immigration into New England, and that would I be okay being interviewed on the Canadian. They said, okay, as long as I don't have to do it all in French. I wish I could, but I could get by a little bit, but not enough. And yeah, it set me to thinking, because I definitely in my family have French-Canadian roots on one side of the family, and Irish roots and Italian roots on the other side. But yeah, they wanted to know, like, if I thought it would be easy for people in New England to research and find a link. And I said, oh yeah, it would be really easy. Come to Lowell, and people in the Center for Lowell History will help you in about 2 hours figure out everything about people as far back as there is in recorded time. This is Lowell now. It's a fascinating data set. If not for immigration, if not for immigrants, refugees, and asylees settling in the city, we would be shrinking. We would be shrinking. You can tell just by looking. White population, 56,000, 46,000. Shrinking by 10,000, while overall the population of the city went up substantially. I've done a similar data research in Lawrence, and historians who have written recently about Lawrence talk about how if not for Dominican immigration into Lawrence, Lawrence would be a ghost town. And in much the same way, it's not as extreme in Lowell, but definitely we would not be the city that I think it's fair to brag about in a lot of ways. But it's in part because of these substantial changes and where those changes are coming from. And again, I don't think enough publicly sort of embrace this fact. This is the immigrant sort of curve, percentages of immigrants in the country over time. You can see 1860, sharp increase right after the Civil War. America is going to basically begin what historians call the first industrial revolution. We need a lot of workers. We're importing thousands of Chinese workers on the West Coast to build a railroad, to do other construction up and down the West Coast. When all that work is done, we basically kick them out. The slump comes obviously in the midst of the Great Depression, but also specific legislation that I'll talk about in a few minutes. In 1924, a very restrictive quota law gets put in place that totally limits the numbers who can come from Southern and Eastern European countries, and that 1924 law bans Asian migration into the US entirely. And those quotas stay on the books until the late 1950s, early 1960s. And so that's why there's this sharp drop. And then in 1965, there's a change in the immigration laws. The quota system ends, and immigration policy based on family reunifications is introduced. And if you're already here, you can bring in extended family. And so the composition of the country is going to change dramatically, and the numbers are going to change dramatically. And what the legislation does, and again, I'll talk about this more in a few minutes, is with the family reunifications, if you're here and you bring your extended family in, it doesn't count against the cap on immigration. So there's a federal cap on newcomers into the country of 500,000. But you could bring in 6 or 7 people in your extended family, they don't count against the cap. And so that's why the numbers went crazy. In a good way, I think, but went crazy. And why they escalated the way that they did. And this bill was done by a Democrat, and the other one that dramatically changed things was done by Ronald Reagan, a conservative Republican. Ronald Reagan created pathways to citizenship for several million people who were here and undocumented. And so for whatever reason, there was a way back then that people could figure out how to cross the aisle and get something done, like what's happened. The problem is the flip side, right? Which is that we have these periods, and we're in one of them now. We have several periods, at least 6 that I have up here, where there's a dramatic turn in the country, in the leadership of the country, against immigration. And these are quite profound when they happen. They're usually quite violent. There are usually deaths, deportations, roundups. So what's happening now is 50 years from now, people will fit this into this history. Some of you will be coming here. If the Paul is still here, I won't be. And there'll be a number 7, which will be now, right, in terms of what's happening. But quickly, Chinese Exclusion Act, 1882. Once the labor that was needed to build a transcontinental railroad and construct much of the West Coast is done, basically there are violent attacks on Chinese communities. Communities literally are burned to the ground. People are violently forced out of the country. That's a period of sharp repression. The Chinese Exclusion Act is the first law on the books in the United States that singles out a specific place in the world and says you can't come here. That's the first time like that it says specifically a country. Radicals, people who are, I guess now, some people in the Democratic Party who think of themselves as democratic socialists, they would be the radicals, I guess, now. The way some other Democrats are talking anyway, crazy. But radicals of the time, Eugene Debs, people like that, Emma Goldman, an anarchist, the lesser radicals are rounded up right around World War I and deported, put on ships, no due process, no like, here's what you did. Basically, you're just rounded up because of who you are. and you're sent away. In 1924, there's an Immigration Restriction Act. I'm going to skip that because I'm going to talk about it more. Between 1925 and 1955, this is something that does not make it into the history books. There is a mass deportation of Mexican immigrants and Mexican American citizens. Over 1 million people. 700,000 of whom are citizens. People are just rounded up, put in trains, and whisked away. So a couple of years ago, when ICE went into a park in LA and rounded up people on a Sunday afternoon, that's what they were doing back then. They would sweep through the Mexican communities in LA and just scoop people up. People would say, wait, I'm a citizen. I was born here. Let me get my papers. Go ahead.
Wasn't the Dodger Stadium built on one of these?
Yes, Dodger Stadium basically, great point. Dodger Stadium is Chavez Ravine basically is the area where one of the largest Mexican communities was that was essentially eliminated. Yeah, go ahead. I'm not going to take too many of these because I'll never finish, but go ahead.
Why Mexican?
Mexican, basically because they're not white. It's that simple.
More immigrants.
Pardon me?
There was more immigrants here. So why Mexican?
Because
so many.
basically the act in 1924 keeps people from coming in. The deportations are getting people out. So if you think about what's happening now, this is a two-pronged strategy. How do we keep people from getting here in the first place? And how do we get rid of the people who are already here, right? So that's what's happening back then. So Mexicans are an easy target. They're easy to see. They speak Spanish, a lot of them. They're living in a well-defined community where you can go and scoop people up. And that's what they do, right? And so, again, think of this. What I'm suggesting is what's happening now is not new. When I teach this at the university, I try to get my students to understand this. This is not some weird aberration. This is part of the history. And so this is a two-pronged strategy in between 1920 and about 1955. Don't let people in as best we can, and also as best we can, let's get rid of the undesirables. And so Mexicans are the easy target during this period of time. The other thing that's going to happen during this period of time is the denial of Jewish refugees to enter the country. So during the rise of Hitler in Germany, boatloads, literally, of Jewish refugees fleeing Hitler are coming across the Atlantic Ocean and are denied entry into ports in the US. Those ships are turned around. And people will say, well, the quota system, we can't let them in because we've already filled up the quota. Turn around and go back. Now again, I liken that now to people trying to get here for asylum and basically at the border saying you can't come in. Also, I liken it to TPS. If you send Haitians back into a set of communities where violence will be done to those people, to me, it's no different than us keeping Jewish refugees. Obviously, it's different, but you get what I'm saying, right? I don't want you to say, like later or somewhere in social media that Forrant said something crazy. But you understand the analogy, right? If in the example from the 1930s, it's knowable. We knew what would happen if we turned those ships around. We cannot say, well, we didn't know. How did we know? We can't blame that on us. How did we know? Well, if you were reading the newspapers at the time, it was freaking obvious, right? So the same thing now, right? I mean, there's a travel ban on, like, if you or I try to go to Haiti on an airplane, we're basically told we can't go, but it's okay to, like, send a whole bunch of people back, a whole bunch of people back. It's the same thing. We know what's going to happen, right? I mean, I think reasonable people would know, right? All right. Moving along. So far, so good. the largest group here in the first place are Irish. Waves of them are coming from the potato famine, the disruption of agricultural life in Ireland, and also actually, frankly, from oppression, repression, whatever word you want to use, from the British. It's why if you go to the Old Court and watch a World Cup game, you should not cheer for England. Not a good idea. But when people came, this is what they faced. And so right over here in St. Patrick's, not the one that's there now, that's a much bigger, grander church than the first one. But when the first church was there in the Irish Acre, a Protestant mob marched on that church to burn it down. They did not succeed because parishioners defended their turf and beat the crap out of the people that tried to burn their church down. And in the Lowell newspaper accounts of it, which I've read, the newspapers are more upset that the Irish actually hit Protestants than that Protestants were trying to burn down the Irish Catholic Church. But again, interesting history, more of what we should know. The kind of jobs people got are obvious, and this is a consistency. Immigrants, by and large, again, not 100%, not universal, but in the main, the jobs that immigrant communities are going to do initially are going to be the difficult, hard, dangerous, dirty ones. That can be meat packing in South Dakota. That can be mining. That can be, in this time period, building the canals, building bridges. In Boston, building the subway tunnels under the Boston Common for the Park Street Station. Whatever it is, right? The most dangerous, the most difficult work, and the work that people would easily be killed from. Accident records that I've been able to look at for this period of time are continually talking about people dying on the job, either in a mill or a canal cave-in while they're working on building a canal. 1840s, the group in Lowell, the dominant group obviously is the Irish. There are small numbers of other people. There are some Germans here, some other groups, but not a lot. After the Civil War comes the explosion. And by 1890, 43%, nearly half of everybody living in Lowell is foreign born. That's going to stay consistent through 1920. 41% in 1900. Lawrence is pretty similar. Lawrence is actually a bit higher in terms of the what's happening.
I had a bee.
Oh.
Yeah.
No.
All right. I thought it was something I thought you were telling me I was doing something wrong. Something was messed up. This is a photo of workers in the mill. What you don't hear of a lot, and I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but what you don't hear a lot is people not getting along at work. In all the oral histories I've read, all the oral histories of people that worked in the mills through the 1940s, 1950s, there's nothing in there where people say, yeah, I hated those people from Poland, or yeah, I didn't like those people from Quebec. Again, I'm not saying, obviously, I live in the real world, but it doesn't seem like it was necessarily a big deal. I don't know why that is, and again, I'm not making some universal that everybody was happily ever after, because again, I live in the real world, but it is what it is. French Canadians are now in Lowell the target. Boy, people don't like French Canadians, especially bankers. Especially bankers. Bankers will not loan money to French-speaking immigrants in Lowell. They consider them a flight risk. That they'll get the money and get on a train and go back to Quebec and never pay it back. So when they're trying to start a small business or buy a triple-decker to get their family along the way as a property owner, as a small business owner, whatever it might be, sorry, no. What they do is pool their resources, start lending societies in the French Acre neighborhood. That ultimately turns into Jeanne d'Arc credit unions. That becomes Jeanne d'Arc Credit Union. That's a story that should be told.
Yeah.
I have sent notes to Jeanne d'Arc Credit Union saying, dudes, like, put a sign on you, like, put something up. Like, do your origin story. It's inspiring, right? That people overcame. We complain a lot, well, people just take, blah, blah. No, like, here's a perfect example of the exact opposite, and yet again, we don't tell it, right? And so, this is the Times, the liberal New York Times, which wasn't always liberal. Ignorant and unenterprising, subservient to the most bigoted class of Catholic priests in the world. They care nothing for our free institutions, have no desire for civil or religious liberty or the benefits of education. Those damn French Canadians. One state senator in Massachusetts on the floor of the State House referred to the French Canadians as the Chinese of the East Coast. That was like the best slur he could come up with, right? But again, it sort of shows you, right, like where this animus was. This was a typical kind of a block where people were living. This is a Lowell photo in Little Canada. 1882. The first time the federal government starts thinking, how do we restrict? How do we keep people out? How do we get more control over who's coming in? How do we screen people? And for the first time, they create a tax. So you have to pay something, even though it's not a lot of money, it's money. And if you scrimped and saved to get money for a ticket, on a ship, on an ocean-going vessel, and then when you get here, you have to come up with a little more money. That can be hard for people. And they also exclude on entry, this is a quote from the law, idiots, lunatics, convicts, and persons likely to become a public charge. A public charge is somebody that poor, maybe can't work, might have a physical condition, maybe they have a really bad back and it's obvious they're not going to be able to work. They're going to become what back then you would refer to as a ward of the state, right? And so an attempt to try to screen people out. 1891, they revised the law, revamped the law. Now they exclude even bigger collections of people. Polygamists. But I asked my students this, if you were a polygamist, and you got off the boat somewhere and they were calling you up to the line, are you a polygamist? Like, what would you... I mean, you can't tell, but I don't think you can tell by looking. Maybe you can, I don't know.
Maybe you
whatever.
get 6 wives with you.
Yeah.
My wife, my sister.
Persons convicted of crimes of moral turpitude. So I don't know if they asked you, like, if you did one, I don't know exactly what, I have a good idea what that means, but, like, an anarchist, right? Now, I think of myself in many ways as I hate all structures and, like, I hate all of it. So I kind of, but if they asked me, I would say, of course not. Like, yes, I am, please send me back. And anybody with a loathsome or contagious disease, right? When Ellis Island opens in 1892, the possibility of screening gets better. And the ability to try to implement these things takes on a really different tone. But it doesn't stop people from coming. 1907 is a record year for people coming into the country. Just over 1 million people. And on one day, over 11,000 people got processed through Ellis Island. So that's extraordinary in terms of the numbers of people and sort of the flow. They started doing these kinds of physical examinations of people, although they were really quick. And so the idea of like that 11,000 people are going to get a great physical examination, yeah, that's not happening. They're looking for telltale signs. They're especially looking for any kind of a communicable disease, for sure. One of the main ones they're looking for is there's an eye disease. I forget the exact, begins with a T. What? Well, it's kind of like conjunctivitis. It's like very contagious, but it can cause blindness. Begins with a T. It's out of my head. But anyway, so like these kids are going to be along the way getting the treatment. What they do is they take a button hook, like for people that darn and weave and whatnot, and like a hook, like think of a fishing hook only that's about this long with a hook on the end. They flip up your eyelid. Because if you're infected, when they flip it up, it's red, right? The genius of it is, what's the opposite of genius? The idiocy of it is, if they flipped up my eyelid and I had it, they would basically go on to the next person with the same. It's not like they had like a thing of disinfectant there to dip it into, like after each one. We're not quite there yet. But I mean, the one thing to the credit of the people that ran the island, when kids came with their families, if kids were sick, if a kid, let's say, had measles or something, but maybe had this eye ailment, whatever, they would not send people back. They built a hospital for kids. The hospital was really, from everything I've read about it, was quite good. And parents could go off the island to New York and come back every day and sit with their kids in this hospital until they got better, and then they would. So, well, again, different than now, where the kids would be in Texas and the parents would be in Maine, and nobody would know what was happening. At least there was an attempt to try to figure that out. Several years ago, I went on a visit, and they had just redone the hospital and opened it to the public to see. It was really pretty extraordinary to sort of to check it out. The interesting thing about the going through the line, as you were going through the line, they had this system where they had a code book of different ailments, like if you had a back injury or if you walked with a limp or anything like that, they would mark it on your clothing in chalk. They would put a little code. And you wouldn't necessarily know what it was when you were going through, right? But if you got to the end of the line and you had so many of these things, it was disqualifying, and they would send you back. After a while, people got used to the fact that that's what that was for. And before they got to the end of the line, they would turn their jacket inside out so nobody could see what was written on the jacket. People tried to figure out a way to beat the system, right? In the end, though, with all the screening and everything they did, less than 5% of people were turned away, which is really pretty amazing, right? With all the effort and energy that they put into trying to screen out the anarchists and whatnot, only about 5% of people. So by, I would say, the start of World War I, so 1915-16, this is a map of Lowell in 1912. By this point, neighborhoods are really pretty dramatically sort of set in terms of where people are living. And again, this doesn't mean that everybody who's Polish lives on Lakeview Avenue, and everybody who's French Canadian lives in the Acre, and everybody who's Jewish lives around where the train station is today. But it means that if you look at the census and you look at the info and you figure out where people live, this is a pretty, again, from my work looking at the census, this is a map from a 1912 book. And it's pretty accurate in terms of the locations of where people live. And what's fascinating about this, and it's the same now, if you drive around now and you're aware and you're looking and you're hopefully not texting, what was happening here is happening now, in that in all of these neighborhoods, there were little stores, little corner markets, bakeries, right? Everything that you could imagine that would provide a service of some sort to that community, and some sort of a connection to home existed in those neighborhoods. No different than now. There's a cycle here of what people do. These are different photographs of, these are all kids in Lowell working in the mills in around 1915. all different nationalities. The photograph here is of part of a Polish neighborhood off Lakeview Avenue. All the photos of the kids were taken by a guy by the name of Louis Hine. He's a famous photographer who took lots of photos, particularly of child labor. Came to Lowell 1912, 1913, and took a ton of photographs. You can find them in the Library of Congress. The cool thing about this is, I mean, I didn't put it down there because it would be too many words on a slide. He had a little notebook, so we know the names of all those kids and where they live, which is really cool. A friend of mine for years, who sadly passed away by the name of Joe Manning, took a lot of Hines photos of Lowell and Lawrence, and generationally, like, played them forward. They found the name and then found their relatives alive now. Instead of going genealogically backwards, he went forwards. And then we had this huge event in Lawrence in 2012 where all the descendants of these, not these are Lowell photos, but of the Lawrence photos, came to this huge party. And most of them did not know these photos existed, that they were looking at their great-great-grandfather or great-great-grandmother or whatever from when they were 10 or 11 or 12 years old. It was really quite an experience. This is what housing would have looked like at the time. Inside would have been pretty much like that. Well into the 20th century, 1915, 1920, lots of apartments did not have electricity yet. Lots of apartments didn't have flush toilets, running water. That's coming, obviously, but it's difficult. The canals are being used basically as gigantic toilets. People just dump everything out off of their back porch if they were lucky enough to be living on the canal. A little bit more. Photos of Lowell always, when you're looking at these photographs, always laundry. They were green without knowing it, right? No clothes dryers for us, right?
Solar drying.
Solar drying, yeah, let the sun work. I love the middle when you're Les Miserables bowling.
Yeah.
That's very cool, right?
Only the French.
That's Lowell, yeah, that's Lowell. That's Lowell. That's the first market basket on the left.
Oh, wow.
That's the first Demoulas market. They didn't know then what they know now. And this was in Little Canada. This was the French Canadian market. But again, I'm trying to get you to see sort of these commonalities in terms of what people did. The idea that education didn't matter from the New York Times article a few slides back, crazy wrong, right? As you can see from this slide. All these different groups starting a school, right? You've got a Greek school, you've got a Hebrew free school, and you've got a public school in Centerville. Again, just the idea that people weren't hungry for getting education is just, again, sort of foolishness. It was the luck of the draw, really. If you were the firstborn kid in a really large family, you were working. You wanted to be fourth or fifth. You didn't want to be first or second. If you were first or second when you hit 14, and if you had 3 other siblings or 4 other siblings, you were going to work. Maybe you went to school at night, but you would have to have a lot of drive to do that after working in a textile mill all day. But communities started schools. Obviously, you could have put parochial schools up there, any number of them as well. So while all this is happening and there's this huge rush of people taking advantage of the economic growth of the country, taking advantage of the religious freedoms of the country, everything that we've been talking about, there starts to be a turn. And the thinking behind it, the arguments behind it, come largely from intellectuals at Harvard and Yale and Princeton. which is why anybody that knows me knows how much I hate Harvard, Yale. Why, even if they offered me a job, I would never have freaking gone to any of those places. But these are the characters. They start something called the Immigration Restriction League. So when I look at the guy on top, I immediately think Stephen Miller.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Same head shape. If I overlay Stephen Miller's face on there, it would work. But they're basically taking this position publicly, forcefully. Southern and Eastern European immigrants are racially inferior and bring poverty and organized crime. They're beating this drum over and over and over and over, starting in the mid-1890s. And again, I liken it to this. They're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. This is also motivated in a really big way. The more research I've done, I was not as aware a while ago as I am now of the role that the Ku Klux Klan played in immigration restriction. They were a major actor in the introduction of quota laws and other things into Congress, and several members of Congress were members of the Klan, dues-paying members of the Klan. And so they really pushed hard to eliminate immigration. One of the largest, this will surprise you, maybe not, one of the largest Klan chapters in the country was Maine.
Wow.
Because they wanted to get rid of the French Canadians. Now Maine is doing it to Somalis, right? Who settled there as refugees. These things just weirdly repeat. But in the 1920s, per capita, Vermont and Maine had as many Ku Klux Klan dues-paying members as like Indiana or Mississippi. No, I mean, I'll defend to the death. I'm not making it up. And this would be the kind of, it was really, I mean, in the South, it was obviously aimed at targeting black people, but throughout the country, the animus was really aimed at Catholics. Catholics were seen as evil as hell. That they were an internal army of the Pope, that they were going to mess up voting, that the Pope would say who to vote for, and they all would. And we got to get rid of them damn Catholics. And this was the target. And so then it spreads. By the early 1920s, the other target becomes Jewish people. Hence the idea of limiting immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe, right? Those are Catholic and Jewish places.
Well, in this cartoon there, KFC is the Knights of Columbus.
Knights of Columbus, yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So it makes Rome tremble. That's the caption.
Yeah, no, they're worried,
Is
right?
there some significance to the owl and the branch?
I don't know. I tried figuring that out. I only found this cartoon the other day, so I haven't completely dissected it yet. Calvin Coolidge, when he was vice president, Calvin Coolidge was the mayor of Northampton. In case any of you don't know that, was the governor of Massachusetts. In case any of you don't know that, and made his political mark crushing the Boston police strike. And that led to him being put on the ticket with Warren G. Harding. Harding died early in office, and Coolidge became president. As accidental a president as there ever was. America must be kept American. Nordics deteriorate when mixed with other races. There's the other thing they were really worrying about. They really maybe that goes back to the polygamous thing, I don't know. They were really worried about who people had their relationships with at this point. And this idea of ruining the race becomes this really big argument that they're making. Albert Johnson, who's a member of the Klan, sponsors this bill in 1924 to prevent what he referred to as race mixing, and he also used the term race suicide. If we don't keep these people out, there goes everything. So they put, quote, go ahead. Was that a hand?
It was.
It was.
Yes, so I've been hearing a lot lately about how the Nazi program developed by studying the Americans. Are you aware of any of that?
Yes, it's true.
Sounds like the same thing.
Hitler very much was aware of what was happening right now in the US and the arguments that were being made, this whole pseudoscience of eugenics, that based on who you are, you have a propensity to crimes. There's a book they put out that has a staircase on it, and depending on where you're from in the world, your propensity to crime is greater and greater. If you're on the top step were Italians. You were the most likely to do bad things. And further down, when you got down to the bottom steps, it was like Sweden and England and Norway. And I just remember the president one day saying, "Why can't we get any immigrants from Norway?" And I thought, oh my God.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was thinking, he must have read something. Then I said, no.
He doesn't read.
But the quote, you can see when you look at this what the quotas did. The quotas worked. The idea of limiting who could come in from where, you can see where immigrants from Northern and Western Europe, right, 1880, 1890, where people are coming from changes in the late 19th century. By the first decade of the 20th century, probably 75% of people coming in are from Southern and Eastern Europe. That's what's freaking people out. And so what they do is come up with, they're very clever in the way they do it. They basically say, they make the argument that we're full. The country's full. We don't want to stop people from coming in, but we can't take as many people as we're taking. So we need a quota, and we need it to be fair. So it's just going to be math. And they say, okay, this is what we're going to do in this quota law. We're going to take how many people from any specific country are living in the United States as of 1890. And then, let's say I'm terrible at math, so I'm going to use the figure 10. Let's say there are 10 Italians living in the United States in 1890. 2% of that 10 can come in the next calendar year, right? And so think of it in big numbers now, which I'm not going to try to do in my head, but think of 1 million people and 2% of 1 million people from Italy, let's say, or wherever. But notice what they did. They picked as the trigger year the decade before, right? If they had picked 1900, or even if they had picked 1900, if they had picked 1900, then the numbers of people coming from Southern and Eastern Europe would have been quite substantial. So what they did is they did this and then they sold it to voters, because they also knew they needed to be reelected and they needed immigrant votes. They had to somehow cast off the idea that they were being discriminatory. It's just math, right? It's just math. It's fair, 2% for everybody, right? But you can see the impact. You can see what it did. These are real numbers. People also self-deported. In the midst of all of this, people left. People said, I can't stay here. We're out of here. And so, which again, I didn't know until fairly recently, 60% of all Southern Italians didn't stay. That's pretty serious. It's a pretty interesting statistic. 46% of Greeks, 31% of Portuguese, 40% of Polish immigrants. People left because of the animus directed at them and their communities. That's a pretty staggering statistic. This, if you're looking for a really good book that sort of puts in context the question from earlier about Hitler and what he was looking at happening in the U.S. and whatnot, this is really very sort of well-researched, sourced, but also because he's a journalist, well-written. As opposed to historians, it's actually it's readable. 100 years ago, the invocation of science was a key element in making the American public believe that these newcomers were inferior, whereas today, it's more an economic argument and an argument about crime. It's a feeling of ethnic superiority. The difference is that today it's Muslims and Latin Americans, and back then it was Jews and Italians. Quite good summary, sort of, again, of where we're at. This is Lowell at rush hour. Trying to get over the Bridge Street Bridge, nothing has changed. As I came over here at 5:30, I was going over the bridge the good way, as opposed to driving back, and it looked just like that. The big difference is you don't have as many walkers, right? I mean, obviously there are a lot of people walking in this particular photo. But again, even 1940 was still this very vibrant immigrant place, right? This is an interesting story. I have more, but I think I'm going to tell the story and then stop so that we have time to chat. In 1955, and so think of this now in terms of refugees, asylees, and the kind of conversation we're having today, right? In 1955, there's an earthquake on one of the Portuguese islands in the Azores, Palau. And people are in difficult circumstances on the island. And the Portuguese community in Lowell comes forward and says, we have to do something. We have to help. But the quota system won't let people in. What are we going to do? And so the Portuguese community organizes, and they go. Firmo Carrera, who's one of the leaders at the time of the Portuguese community, they write a letter to Senator John Kennedy and say, Dear Senator Kennedy, the Portuguese community needs your help. Can you help us work with the State Department and the government, blah, 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 and let people in? And this is the tagline on the letter, which I really love. With every good wish for the future, I'm your humble Portuguese friend from Lowell. How Lowell, right? I mean, and Kennedy responds. And with the senator from Connecticut, John Chafee, who's the senator there at the time, they basically get the quota lifted so several hundred people can get off the island and come to Lowell. So there are the descendants around town of the folks, basically through the work of Firmo Carrera and the Portuguese Civic Center and, again, the community, right, to get people here. This is a photograph I found in the newspaper when I was doing research on this. And the article refers to them as volcano families, which I thought was really interesting kind of tagline. One of the first volcano families to arrive in Lowell. And the International Institute basically was the main sort of organization that helped people settle, found people places to live, found people work. The last little bit, I shouldn't say, let me do a couple more, because this really matters to sort of now. By the 1950s, the city is really down and out. It recovers a little bit from the Great Depression with war production in the 1940s. And so a lot of the mills fill back up doing stuff related to war. There's a couple of parachute factories that employ lots of women. There's a Remington arms factory that in one of the old mills that employs a lot of people. General Electric comes and takes up space doing stuff. So there's a lot of jobs, but when the war is over, those jobs go away. And city government decides that the way forward is going to be to take down some of the immigrant neighborhoods in the city. And so they've done this once already. They bulldozed down the old Greek neighborhood in the 1940s. There's an area called the Greek Triangle Acre, like right around where the Greek church is, off Market Street. They bulldozed down that neighborhood in the 1940s, and they get, because of the Great Depression, the federal government makes money available to communities to knock down what they call blighted buildings and rebuild, and the city's looking for any way to jumpstart the economy. So they tear that neighborhood down. That's the first experience with taking a big sledgehammer, if you will, to a large immigrant neighborhood. Little Canada is next, the French-Canadian neighborhood, all up around where the university is now, like where the ballpark is, where the arena is, where the rec center is. That whole big area was like ground zero for the really large, pretty vibrant, still at this point, French-Canadian community. And this is the way it was depicted. They actually never, when they passed the ordinances to take down the neighborhood, they stopped calling it Little Canada, so that it wouldn't connote to people that there were actually people. They called it the Northern Canal Project. So it seemed more benign. Everybody follow what I mean by that? It's like, well, if you say Little Canada, wait, I have some friends who live there, but well, it's just the Northern Canal. We don't need the canal anymore anyway. It's like 1950. And so they got away with it. And they literally tore it down. That's a photograph. I have like dozens and dozens of photographs. The way that they roasted out this neighborhood was really quite extraordinary. And they did it street by street. So you were sort of living on one of the streets. The next street over was being bulldozed down. And you were just waiting for the wrecking ball to come to your place. The other neighborhood they tore down was what had been a historically Jewish neighborhood, but at this point in the 1960s was becoming African American, Puerto Rican, Dominican. It was probably the largest concentration of persons of color living in the city of Lowell at the time. This is over where the train station is, the whole area right across from South Common. And that neighborhood got torn down as well. We're lucky that there was a photographer who, very weird story, but I don't need to tell it. But anyway, we're lucky that the photographer who took these pictures came to Lowell, owned a German car. There was an old German Jewish mechanic still living in the neighborhood who worked on German cars, and when he came to get his car fixed, he would bring his camera. They'd walk around in Hale Howard taking photographs. In a notebook, writing even the weather, time of day, temperature, weather, and the names of the people. And so these are representative of who was living in the neighborhood at the time. And that neighborhood got torn down for the connector, right? And so the connector, for those of you that have cursed the darkness when you've been stuck on it. The connector ends where it ends because of immigrant protest. When the connector was designed, it was going to go right straight through that neighborhood. When you sort of think, oh, that poor person with that wall that keeps getting hit by cars, that all was going to be gone. The connector was going to go straight through what was a largely Portuguese Catholic neighborhood and come out all the way on the other side by the auditorium. You have to kind of visualize what that would have done. But it would have ripped right through. So where that plaza is Central Street, that had also been a small, historically black neighborhood. That got torn down and prepped for the connector. But when the connector started creeping into what was going to be that neighborhood, the Portuguese community said, wait, we just saw what you did to Little Canada. We also just saw what you did to Hale Howard. Yeah, twice, but no, not 3 times. You're not coming through here. And they organized politically. They elected enough people to the council who publicly declared they would vote against the extension of the connector. And it stopped. That's why it stopped where it stopped. Or the city would look really remarkably different than it does today. I have more, but I want to stop so you have time to talk, and I'm also like dying. And I don't really want to drop that up here and have that be your 4th of July visual.
Bob, the last time I was here, the last time that I was here with you, you did a presentation similar to this one on the issue of birthright citizenship. And we talked about it a little earlier. You said you were going to talk about the ruling. I wanted to give you
Yeah,
a
that's when I
chance to do
stopped.
that.
Birthright citizenship. So what's interesting is if you want an actually really good history lesson, read the opinion of the six. It's like this incredibly documented history of race in America and all the crap perpetrated and what's been done to immigrants, what's been done to black people, the origins of the 14th Amendment, giving citizenship to people that had been denied even their humanity before the Civil War. And it's really like, it's this incredible document. And then when you juxtapose it to the Maniac 3, it's like you're in two completely different, because there's 5 people that are on the majority opinion. There's the 6th person, Kavanaugh, who votes in favor of birthright citizenship, but he comes up with a very convoluted reason why. So he writes a separate opinion. And then there are the conservative 3, Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas. And they basically say the Constitution isn't the Constitution, because they say that the president actually has the executive authority to change the Constitution at will, because he's the president. It's when you read that, it's like, wait, come on. It's really, so either they had a horrible reading teacher, but I really don't want to blame their teachers, since I love teachers. Or like, I don't know, right? But it is interesting because there's already Lindsey Graham, somebody in the Senate and the House, have already begun sponsoring legislation to do away with birthright citizenship. Now, again, I don't know how they're going to get around the fact that it's the Constitution and that you can't even do that way. If it's in the Constitution, it has to be amended. Otherwise, like for prohibition, they just would have said, let's have prohibition. It's a constitutional amendment, right? And then there's an amendment to take it out. So it's not going to go away. The more troubling, I think, for now is the ruling on temporary status. That's really troubling because the harm that's an immediate harm, and I'm not sure. Again, reading that one, they basically say the court basically says by the majority, the president has a right to do it, and so. I don't think even when he starts, people are probably going to file lawsuits to try to prevent it, but I don't think it's going to work. Just because of that court ruling. I don't think any lower court judges are going to back their way into it. So, in the same way with the asylum one's a little more vague, but ordinarily when people, if they were claiming asylum, if they got to the border, they could basically say to somebody waiting on the U.S. side, I'm here to claim asylum. They would let them in to do it. And what the court said is you have the right to not let them in. And if you don't let them in, the way they interpret the asylum laws in this country, in means in. Right? And before, the interpretation was, well, if you're at the border, you're in. And now what Trump is saying, no, in means in, and the court agreed. So you have to be over the line. And if you're gonna block people from getting over the line, then that many more people seeking asylum are not gonna be. And so the harms, I mean, the detriments globally will escalate. We can already see with Ebola, with HIV/AIDS, with all sorts of things that are happening in the world because of other cuts that were made last year with Elon Musk. The history of this period, when it's really fully written, again, it's going to take a while, but when somebody really writes the story, the amount of death that this administration will have caused is going to be there's not going to be anything like it. The closest thing to it will be the genocide against Native Americans in terms of like domestic history. I think that will be one of the things that it will be compared to. I mean, it's really stunning what's, and we're all sort of immune to, not everybody, obviously you're all here on a hot night, but in general we're immune to wanting to think about it, and so that's what's really troubling. Yes, former student.
Thank you. To bring the conversation or turn the conversation a little bit back to Lowell, and also
Yes.
kind of thinking about the Lowell connector and urban renewal and the way that we cycle things through the city, and not necessarily wanting to have difficult conversations until the harm is done and then going, oh, we had no idea. You're my alma mater, your former place of work / current place of work. I guess as we think about the Link project, the kind of innocuously named Link project, and what neighborhood happens to be facing the majority of that development, and also what the plan is for what they're making inside of these development buildings. And then kind of juxtaposing that also amazingly with Back Central South Lowell, where we have this kind of dungeon, watch a lion's den, right? Of the data center. On the data center quickly, and then back to Link, just if anyone hasn't seen IBEW and Mark Lee's video that came out this morning, doing exactly what you had just talked about with North Canal and Old Canada, where you just kind of remove all of the people who happen to live nearby and say,
Don't promote that, be real.
yeah, I maybe don't watch it, but,
Yeah.
but they actually, it was kind of like spaghetti. It's spaghetti, but it was insane to watch, right? Where you're doing this video where like I've been in that neighborhood, I go to that neighborhood a lot, and they're like, "There's nobody here. Look at all the nice things we've done, and nobody lives here. Look at my nice. I planted a tree." But I think the same thing is true with kind of the political third rail of the city, which is the university. And so as they're continuing this Link project, I have a seat where I'm not supposed to say I don't necessarily like it, and I'll probably vote for it, and you can all be mad at me. But until we get there, right? What goes into that, and how do you see kind of learning from past both wins and failures, and how the predominantly immigrant communities that are going to be impacted by these developments that are going in can, if not stop, at least make concessions? Because I can't figure it out.
Yeah, I mean I think that the problem with the university, and I've said this to people to their face, so I'm not saying anything I'm not afraid
Yeah,
of.
me too.
I'm not afraid of. Yeah, in case you're taping. I'm okay with it. The university thinks first of the university, and second of the people that it might impact. And it doesn't really, it not always in 100%, to not be completely on the negative. And I think that the university's done a lot of grand things for the city. I look at people that work in City Hall, in the planning department, and the treasurer, and all these things. They're all my students. And it's sort of like, this is cool. So I think the university has done like a great job in that way. I don't necessarily think that a university-led development project, on the face of it, is bad. What I do think is bad is that the university does not include people from the community in the conversation. And so they make decisions just like North Canal or just like Mark Lee, and then after the fact they go, oops. and it's too late, right? You're not going to tear down the data centers. Well,
I'm not gonna try.
whatever, right? But it's doubtful, right?
Yeah.
So once Little Canada is gone, people saying, "Oh, you shouldn't do that." You're not going to rebuild it, right? So what the community needs to do, and I've talked to people in the CBA about this. I've done works. They have a community group that they do call Empower, right, where they like work with people in the neighborhood about these kind of issues. And I always go and talk to them, and I say that you need to be demanding that the university respect the community, and that you have to go to them and say, "Where's the jobs? This is cool, but what about jobs for us? And also, what are you going to do about the fact that all your students are jacking up the prices of all the housing in the acre by living 5 in an apartment that used to have a family with a mom and a dad and an auntie and 3 kids? Now they can't afford to live there because you have 5 students living there. Like, what are you going to... You can't keep growing and not build more housing. You can't keep saying you want to build more graduate programs. Graduate students don't want to live in dorms. So if you grow the graduate programs at the university by 1,000, you've taken 1,000 places out of the housing market for Lowellians and greater Lowellians. So what are you going to do about it? And this is a city conversation. It's not something that the university, again, in my opinion, and I've said this from back when Marty Meehan was chancellor, and I get that. I mean, I feel like people will listen to me. I don't necessarily know if then they'll go and say, "Yeah, Bob said we should do this, so we're going to do it." I'm not that stupid. So they'll listen, and I do think that the current chancellor, actually, her heart's in the right place for trying to figure this stuff out. But I think people need to be bold in pushing and not waiting, because they're not going to do. Nobody in these big institutional places is going to do anything if they're not pushed. They're simply not. Not of their own free will. They're just simply not going to do it. As evidenced by the connector, the fight to desegregate the schools, and the voting rights. Nobody did anything until they were forced to do it. And then they only grudgingly did it. And did it, some might think, only about 2/3 of the way, at best. But anyway, so I feel like, I mean, the university is a major user of the data center. So they can't wash their hands of it and say, "Well, that's over in South Lowell. We're in the acre. We don't have anything to do with that." That doesn't work.
No.
But they're like, what's the guy, Pontius Pilate? Who was it that washed his hands?
That was him.
Like, not me. Yeah. Whatever.
Thank you very much, Bob. Let's give him another round of applause.